would like to welcome an icon of the Australian medical research world, Professor Nikolai Petrovsky, to Immunity Group Australia podcast. Welcome, Professor Nick.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
You're currently in America, in Colorado. Tell us, what is the atmosphere on the eve of the new presidential inauguration?
Look, I think there's an enormous excitement, a little bit of trepidation, I think, from the more democratic side of the US. But I get the sense that overall people realize there needs to be change. You know, the US has been sort of almost digging itself into a hole in recent years. You know, getting involved in wars and making a mess of many things, and its economy, you know, has been doing okay, but they're obviously things like manufacturing which have been weak, and so I think that there is a sense of positivity around, you know, this new administration. I think it's very new. In other words, the people Trump is got with him, who he's putting into all of these new positions, are not the people, you know, 8 years ago. So although Trump, you know, is the common factor, I think people realize he's actually, through experience, hopefully now got a much better group around him of professionals who'll be able to you know, enact policy and move things forward. But, you know, again, hopefully he said tonight in his speeches and today in his speeches that he wants to be a unifying president. After all the divisiveness of the last 8 years, I mean, the US desperately needs someone who does bring all sides together. I mean, I would hope, you know, that he can, but of course we'll have to wait and see. But it's funny, but it seems like every time we're in the US, something exciting is happening. You know, the previous time we were here with a pandemic started, and so we watched the whole start of the pandemic evolve in the US, and we actually got the last Qantas flight out of the US before Qantas shut in 2020. That was quite emotional, because at the end of the flight crew were all losing their jobs and being stood down, and, you know, because Qantas, as you recall, just shuttered its whole fleet for several years, and we were on that last plane. So yeah, and this time we're here, and it's all the excitement of the inauguration. So somehow we just managed to always be in the US when something really big is happening.
And interestingly, now our co-founder, Dr. Jones, is actually involved in finding a cure for long COVID conditions as an immunologist. So that's interesting that the new US administration, there is a hope that they will put more resources into medical research, and in particular finding solutions to the new problems, like you mentioned, after COVID. There were all these new things we have to find solutions for.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, that is one area I know people have a little bit of trepidation, because traditionally the Republicans have, if anything, reduced funding for medical research, you know, because their belief is that, you know, everything should be done by private industry, and therefore the government shouldn't have to provide a large amount of subsidy and grants and like NIH funding. And so traditionally the Republicans have slashed the NIH budget and the Democrats have increased it. So yeah, I like you, I hope that because he's got very good advisors around him, that he will, you know, may restructure it, because you know, he has talked about the need to restructure, particularly the Health and Human Services, the NIH, the FDA, the CDC. And I think everyone realizes, you know, these organizations become very bound up in red tape and bureaucratic, and fixed in their ways. And yes, they need to be revitalized and restructured. But I hope that doesn't mean, that he just slashes their budget and diminishes them. I'm hoping that he increases their budget and forces a process of renewal, because the US, really relies upon medical research. That they have a massive biotechnology industry. And that biotechnology industry feeds on research that comes out of the NIH and that comes out of the NIH funding. And so I think it's extremely important that not be damaged, and so we'll just have to wait and see. But
I love that message. It's a great message for the scientific community in the US. And recently, actually, their National Science Agency has been putting a lot of money into dementia research and the microbiome. So the gut, brain, gut, skin, and gut connections to everything. So we hope that they will be at the forefront of a new discovery in the future.
Yeah, and of course we receive all our funding essentially, and have done for the last 20 years from these US agencies. And so we are doing an Alzheimer's disease vaccine, which is again funded by the NIH. We're actually doing one of the first human clinical trials in Adelaide right now. Like it's already started, and people are getting vaccinated against Alzheimer's disease. So it's an exceptionally exciting time for us. And again, only possible because of US government support. So I think you're right. I mean, so much research in the world relies on US government support. And so let's hope that, that continues and increases, under the new administration.
You're the first vaccine developer who we have ever hosted on our podcast. How did you get involved in that? Like, how does a student choose to, one day become a vaccine developer? Tell us about your past and perhaps your path to becoming professor and, one of the leading scientists in the world in your field.
Well, I initially did medicine, back in the 1970s. And, I came from a very medical family. My mother, my father, my sister, all doctors. And another sister was a nurse. So, and I always loved science. I mean, I excelled from a very early age at school in science subjects. And I just love science. It's just, if you're interested in discovery and new ideas and how things work, that's what creates the passion for science. Like, ask
did your parents do any specific parenting skills to foster that, or was it the school?
No, they were very hands-off. We were a family of 5 children, so we were a big family, and we had busy parents. My father was running a hospital in Launceston. He'd previously been an army doctor with the British Army, and then came to Australia in the 1950s and became the superintendent of the hospital, which was an extremely busy job in those days, because I think there were 3 people running a 200-300 bed hospital. There was a matron, there was my father as the superintendent, and then they had like a business manager. If you look at the same hospitals today, even the same hospital he ran, you'll find there's like around about 1,000 administrators. And the number of patients being processed is no different 50 years later.
Unbelievable.
But this is the problem in Australia, and I think the US, and probably globally. We're being drowned in bureaucracy and red tape and inefficiency. And so that's something I guess I've learned from my father is how to be efficient. Like our vaccine team, and this translates to the current time. I mean, we developed our COVID vaccine with 10 people. That's meant to be impossible. Pfizer has 100,000 people. Our closest, probably the smallest of our competitors would be Novavax, and they have thousands of people. And we beat them all, or at least we certainly beat Novavax. We're a few months behind Pfizer, but we did it with 10 people.
What's the secret? What did you did? Was it a special drink that you had so you never slept, or
No,
what?
no, no. Well, we didn't sleep. Still don't sleep. The work never ends. But no, it's having the a couple of a small team of very, very professional people who are able to multitask, who don't just focus on one aspect or one widget, but actually all embrace the whole project. So it takes a lot of depth of knowledge of each member of the team. And the answer is, you have to find all the answers that a team of 10,000 people find, but it just means each member of your team has to find 100 or 1,000 answers. And if you do it that way, you end up with an extremely efficient team, and there's nothing you can't tackle. So bureaucracy is actually an illusion. The idea that you need hundreds of thousands of people, in the government to make anything happen is ludicrous. We all know governments don't actually make anything happen, in truth. They help things happen. But when they build these massive bureaucracies, all they do is actually stop things happening. And I would have to say a COVID vaccine would have been twice as fast if it hadn't been for Australian government departments and all their red tape and bureaucracy and none of it makes sense. It's all just there to obstruct.
So, but your
And so
vaccine
yeah.
very
Sorry.
well. Your vaccine was very successful in Iran and Southeast Asia, and you actually received an award recently in Singapore. Can you tell us about that?
Well, yeah. Look, we unfortunately not received a lot of recognition in Australia for our efforts, and that's disappointing for our whole team to not get recognised. It's like just silence. It's extraordinary. When we were successful, we delivered our vaccine, as you mentioned. We had 8 million doses were actually used. And we've published some 20 or 30 papers showing how effective the vaccine is. It had no side effects, so it didn't cause myocarditis, it didn't cause fatal blood clots. And it protects against the severe COVID. And I say that because none of the vaccines protected against or stopped people getting infected with COVID, and none of the vaccines stopped transmission. And as a vaccine developer, I think it's important that that truth be out there, right? None of the vaccines, not mine, not anyone else's. Unfortunately, all the other vaccines were marketed on false information, promising people that if they had the vaccine, they wouldn't get infected and they wouldn't transmit the infection to other people. That was unfortunately a complete lie. And I think it's damaged the vaccine industry that those lies were told over and over again at the very highest levels of the Australian government, the Australian Health Department. And people now know it's a lie, right? Because the truth eventually always comes out. And so what I was saying from day one is, don't tell this lie. There is no necessity to lie to the public. Tell the truth and then let the public make the choice. Do they want to be vaccinated or not? It shouldn't be compulsory. It shouldn't be forced on people. And of course, I got into a lot of trouble for that and lost, essentially, most of my career because I was then targeted.
What happened with there was even a news item about you potentially losing your job at university where you contributed for decades. What happened with that?
Yeah, no, so I lost everything. So I lost my university position at Flinders University. That was stripped off me. I lost my medical position, with the South Australian Health Department. And of course now we're in legal proceedings to try and correct some of that and show it for what it was. unlawful targeting of a scientist for trying to be an honest scientist
And
by
you
the
have
government.
such a big history of developing vaccines, and one of my favorites is your jumping jack ants vaccine. I mean, maybe our listeners from America are not familiar with that. If you don't mind mentioning that, because that saves lives in Australia on a daily basis.
So yeah, so it's actually a jack jumper, which is a large ant. It's about half an inch to an inch long, so it's quite a big ant, which actually jumps on you. So if you come near a nest, unlike other ants that come at you across the ground so you can run away, the jack jumpers are quite nasty because they can jump at you from like 6 feet away and land on you and bite you. They're very aggressive.
Pretty scary. So you
And
can't
and
really protect
and
yourself.
and yeah, so they deliver a very nasty bite, which hurts a lot. But unfortunately, some people are highly allergic to the bite and develop what we call anaphylaxis. In other words, they go into shock and can die if they don't get adrenaline. And so yes, over a period of about 10 years, a famous South Australian immunologist, Professor Bob Heddle, actually set out to develop a vaccine against the jack jumper. And then so they developed the vaccine, and then they were looking at ways to improve it. And that's when Bob Heddle approached me and got me involved in the project to see if we could turbocharge the vaccine he had created and potentially make a better vaccine that could be given to more people and had a lower cost to make it. So yeah, again, when you're in this field, because there aren't many vaccine developers in Australia, you get approached by all sorts of people with all sorts of ideas or projects, and we've now been involved, I think, in several hundred vaccine there's if you named any vaccine on the planet, we've actually worked probably on it. So we've done Ebola vaccines with the US military. We've done malaria vaccines, we've done HIV vaccines, every organism on the planet, all the coronaviruses, MERS, influenza. So anything in the infectious disease realm, we will have worked on it. And of course, we've also worked on the allergy side. We've worked on cancer vaccines, and we've got a very promising cancer vaccine trial actually going in Australia at the moment, and seen some really promising results in people who have very advanced stage cancer. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, we've got an Alzheimer's disease vaccine trial running in Adelaide right now. So, and we've also done vaccines for drug addiction,
There is
against
a
fentanyl.
vaccine for drug addiction.
Yes.
Wow.
So we can generate antibodies that actually bind the drug and stop it working.
That's incredible.
So yeah, a lot of people think of vaccines and think of infections, but vaccines really are what we call immune engineering, or modifying our immune systems. And our immune systems do everything in our body. Like people don't realize, there's almost nothing you can't do through the immune system. And so vaccines,
can we expect an anti-aging vaccine in the future?
Absolutely. Again, you just have to find what the cause is. It's like there's a vaccine against blood pressure, which went into human trials. It worked. In that case, it wasn't ours. It was another company, and it just didn't work well enough to compete with blood pressure tablets. But it worked, right? So it just needs to be. And part of my job is to take those ideas that half worked, like the jumper jack ant or like the blood pressure, and try and improve them and make them work. And so there's almost nothing you can't do with a vaccine. It really is extraordinary.
people are quite scared of any new pandemic in the Asia Pacific region, and the bird flu is now on the horizon. And some governments, like New Zealand government, are stocking up on some of those vaccines. In terms of next pandemics, what's your prediction? Are we about to brace ahead of another pandemic?
Well, we will have future pandemics. Unfortunately, that's just a reality. What we don't know is what exactly is going to be the cause of the pandemic. But we do know the types of viruses that are likely. I mean, I predicted, believe it or not, the COVID-19 pandemic. I wrote a chapter in 2016, so it's published. People can look it up. And there I said, I think that the next pandemic may be a coronavirus pandemic. And sure enough, 3 years later, we have a coronavirus pandemic.
Wow, how did that make you feel that you were actually right? That would have been quite scary, actually.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, we'd worked on a SARS vaccine back in early 2000s when we had that, the original SARS coronavirus outbreak, and we developed a successful vaccine. It didn't get used because SARS was actually eradicated by quarantine and isolation. But then we worked and developed a MERS vaccine, a MERS coronavirus vaccine, which we tested in camels because they're the vector, and showed that it was working. Back in 2012. So we had this history, and we knew coronaviruses, and when they hit humans, they're nasty. And so that's why I made that prediction in that book, having seen SARS and then MERS. I didn't know which coronavirus, but it was a good chance that it was going to be a coronavirus. So we were already thinking about, well, what will it look like and how will we approach it? And that's why we were able to make our vaccine so rapidly. And despite the fact we had no support whatsoever, unlike all our competitors who had billions of dollars of support, we had nothing. But we still got there anyway, because we'd really thought about this problem for 15 years and been working on this problem. The same applies to influenza. So funnily enough, I was working on H5, which is the current influenza, avian influenza, which, is in the US and has been causing all the problems in cattle. And now we've had some human infections, and it may be the next pandemic virus. Maybe. We still don't know.
Are you working on that vaccine so we can
Absolutely, of course.
now?
That's my job, is to always be in front of the virus, and again, always thinking about what might happen and then taking preemptive action, because no good to start working on it after you have the pandemic start. You have to have everything in place beforehand, and that way you can work very, very fast. And so, yes, we're absolutely working on a current version of the H5. We already have one from 15 years ago, which we've actually rolled out again, and it looks like it will work against the current H5. So if we had to, we would be making that vaccine. But in the meantime, we're improving it by making sure it matches identically to the current strain of the virus. So yeah, look, it's scary. I mean, if you, again, when you're one of these, you don't want to sort of cry wolf. So I'm not in the habit of saying already this is a certain pandemic, but what I can say is this is potentially quite scary. I mean, it could easily turn into a pandemic virus. It may not do so, but if it does, all bets are off. Like, we're in for a hard time, much harder than COVID.
And your vaccine is particularly successful in poor countries, which had the problem of refrigeration. Countries like Indonesia with thousands of islands, no refrigeration, no deep refrigeration. And you were also warning a lot about the possible consequences of the instability stemming from mRNA technology. For those of us who are not scientists, why is mRNA technology so unstable?
Well, again, the problem with the RNA technology is it's still very, very, very young. So even during the course of the last 4 years, people have been successfully working out how to stabilize the RNA better. So, but at the time the pandemic happened, this had never been used before. So it was thrown together in a matter of weeks. And so it wasn't surprising that, you know, it didn't hold together very well because it hadn't been optimized. It really was something that was pulled out of the hat at the last minute. And so it was very unstable, hence it had to be in ultra cold freezers, and so it was never going to be used in Africa or most parts of Africa and large parts of the world. It was never going to be suitable or capable of being rolled out. And so that's where protein-based vaccines like I work on are so important, that they are stable, and they can be made at very low cost, as we demonstrated, and they can be distributed in difficult places where some of these newer technologies wouldn't be suitable.
Do you think, Professor, I mean, coming from the food allergy world, Australia is the food allergy capital of the world, and nobody knows why. Do you think there is a theoretical hope that there could be a vaccine for food allergies, for food allergy protein in particular?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned before, there's almost nothing you can't get the immune system to do if you understand the problem well enough. So with food allergy, it still needs to be more research into the exact mechanisms of it. But already there's evidence, and we worked with a local team in Adelaide who had been developing a peanut allergy vaccine. And very promising. And again, we were working out how to improve it and how to potentially commercialize it. Unfortunately, again, because of university priorities, that program got shut down within the university, so it hasn't gone anywhere, which is very disappointing. So I can't really influence that. But the early data, including in children, human children, not just in animal models, was looking very promising. So yes, I mean, vaccines against food allergy, absolutely. It's just a matter of investing enough time and resources. I have no doubt at all that you can't make a vaccine for food allergy.
So what's next on the horizon for yourself in terms of your company and the future directions? If we can also mention the name of the award which you received in Singapore, I found it very prestigious. And yeah, if you can explain what happened in Singapore recently.
Well, so unfortunately, I don't want to make light of it, but I've had so many awards that I'm not entirely sure of which one you're referring to. But there was a Vaccine CEO of the Year award.
I think that was the one.
Yeah, which was IMAPAC, which was quite a prestigious international award. Which obviously followed on from our successful COVID vaccine. But right now, we're just trying to survive, I guess, and revitalize. As I say, we've been fairly brutalized by the government, Australian government, both federal but particularly the South Australian government. And by the local establishment, which has made it very difficult for me and for the company, despite all of our global success. So that's forced us to look overseas, and so we're currently setting up operations in the United States because we think that will be a more favourable environment. Unfortunately, going forward, Australia is not a very supportive environment, I think, particularly for biotechnology entrepreneurs and people trying to really make an impact. It is a very much club-like mentality, science in Australia. It's still that good old Anglo-Saxon club that they don't easily welcome people into. And so I think, yeah, we've found the US and other countries, the science establishments far more open, far more embracing of new ideas, and teams obviously who have strong track records, who they think will may be able to make a breakthrough. Australia doesn't like breakthroughs, believe it or not. It likes mining iron ore and coal and shipping it in boats overseas and making lots of money from it. But in truth, the establishment don't see science as the future of Australia. They do it, but they don't really embrace it. And unfortunately, it's not the best country to do science in.
Well, we hope that for your new inventions in the US, one day they will come to Australia in the form of
absolutely.
a
And we haven't given up, but I think it would require, something like we've just seen in the US, where voters actually get together and decide we want change, and voters really need to drive change. In other words, if they don't like the establishment, they don't like the current government, they have to do something about it. And I think, unfortunately, Australians traditionally have been quite passive when it comes to politics. And if they have, if they don't like what they see, to an extent, they have to blame themselves for not being more proactive in politics and forcing politicians to actually do the things that the community wants. Otherwise, politicians just are self-serving. If you don't make any demands of your politicians, they just look after themselves.
Well, we hope that
again, that's human nature. Do you know what I mean? And so voters have to be much more demanding of their politicians.
In Europe, it's a big trend, and it has caused a lot of change. So we hope that Australian students of politics and general public and the youth will change that in the future, especially people from diverse backgrounds.
Absolutely. And I think that's important, that everyone has a voice and everyone makes their voice heard. At the moment, we hear voices from tiny minorities sometimes because they shout the loudest. And then the majority, who typically in Australia are silent, get forgotten. And so I think it's a time where every Australian, whoever they are, whatever group they belong to, have a voice. Like, let's all hear it. And maybe out of that, we can find some common purpose. And I think science is a unifying goal. It's about improving mankind. It's about, making new discoveries and ultimately improving all our lives. And so I would hope that people would embrace science, because I know that there is this anti-science also element. But ultimately, I think science is a unifying force. And so, anyone thinking of a career, I would still recommend, if they're passionate, that they consider going into science.
I think, Professor Petrovsky, this is the best message ahead of the next federal elections.
Absolutely. And they're not far away, but everyone, all those young people particularly, think really carefully about who they're going to vote for and how they're going to vote. Don't just go in there and just randomly tick a box, Labor or Liberal.
National Science Party. I love the idea.
Actually, maybe that's not such a bad idea. I think that may resonate. And again, science is about fact, and that was the disappointing thing during the pandemic, because suddenly we had, the health departments actually being anti-science, because they were providing misinformation. They were providing things that weren't true, that weren't factually true. That is not what scientists do. And so I do think we do need to have a group who remind everyone what true science is about. True science is about the truth, and it sometimes the truth is uncomfortable, or you might like the truth, but the truth is the truth, and science is just all about getting to the truth of something. It isn't about politics, and unfortunately, during the pandemic, science got politicized, and it stopped being about the truth. It became about the message. What message do we want to convey? Well, that's politics. Scientists should stay out of that. Unfortunately, during the pandemic, the two got
Convoluted. Well,
yeah,
let's hope that more young people and young scientists will be interested in politics. And I would love to have you again back on our podcast after perhaps your first results for the Alzheimer's vaccine. I think that sounds absolutely promising for the goodness of Australia and the world.
absolutely. I'd love to come back.
Thank you, Professor Petrovsky, for your time.
It's a real pleasure.